My name is Eleanor Briggs. I am 62 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and I have been a widow for the past 7 years. I live alone now in a modest home filled with memories, most of them formed by the love I gave while raising my only son, Lucas. A few months ago, I gave Lucas and his wife, Brooke, a fully paid house, with no mortgage and no debt attached. I used my life savings and told myself it was an act of love, a foundation for their growing family. I selected the paint colors, put furniture together in my garage, and even sewed the curtains by hand. It was more than a house, it was a part of me. So when I received a message from Lucas that morning, my hands shook in a way I had not felt since the day we buried his father. The screen lit up with a short message. He explained that I would not be joining them on the family cruise, and added that Brooke preferred to keep it limited to family only. Just family. Somehow, I no longer counted as that. I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the smell of untouched coffee, reading the message again while my fingers felt stiff and cold. I typed back a brief response telling him I understood. That reply held everything inside it: the pain, the shock, and the sudden clarity. I pressed send while a voice inside me screamed that I had been good enough to buy their house but not good enough to sit at their table or share their vacation. My heart raced, but my face remained calm and still. In that moment, something inside me broke. The part that made excuses for others. The part that stayed quiet to avoid conflict. That part disappeared. Morning light slowly crossed the floor, touching the kitchen chairs I had once refinished by hand. Those were the same chairs Lucas sat on as a child, with scraped knees and endless questions about the stars. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who had quietly drawn a boundary I was no longer allowed to cross. The house felt unfamiliar, like a display of poor choices. Photos lined the walls, each one paid for by me, capturing smiles from vacations I had fully funded. A trip to Disneyland when Lucas was 7. A getaway to Cancun when Brooke first joined the family. There was also the cozy cabin trip I insisted on paying for that Christmas when they said money was tight. I had told myself it was my gift to them. Now all I saw were expenses framed as memories. My thoughts returned to their housewarming party the previous spring, the one I planned and paid for. I remember Brooke holding my hands, smiling through tears as she thanked me and promised I would always have a room there. I believed her because mothers believe. That is what we do. I remembered spending evenings repainting their bedroom while they were at work, choosing soft lavender because Brooke said it helped her relax. I ordered new curtains online and installed them myself. Every piece of furniture in that house carried my fingerprints. Every pillow, lamp, and rug. I stayed busy to avoid facing the quiet truth. They did not call often. They rarely came by, but I told myself they were simply busy. That is what young couples do, I said. They work hard. They settle in. They figure things out. But that was not the truth. The truth was heavier than paint cans and moving boxes. I had made myself so useful that they stopped seeing me as a person. I became the fixer, the helper, the source of money. And once the money was gone, there was little need for the woman behind it. I had given too much for too long, and in return I had been quietly pushed aside. The next morning, the silence in my house felt unbearable. It was not a comforting quiet, but one that pressed on my chest, made my hands restless, and reminded me that something was deeply wrong. I picked up the phone and called Judith. She arrived within the hour without hesitation, just as she always had. That is the nature of old friendships. She walked into my kitchen, looked at my face, and did not need to ask what had happened. She gently asked me to tell her as she set her purse down. I slid my phone across the table so she could read the message herself. Her jaw tightened as she read. She did not speak immediately, only shook her head slowly, as if she had been expecting this. She said she believed they had been planning this for some time. I shook my head and said I thought maybe it was only Brooke, that perhaps she had influenced him. I said that Lucas was not like this. Judith looked at me with the honesty only a lifelong friend can offer and reached for my hand. She told me I had raised a good boy, but also one who never had to struggle because I was always there fixing everything. She explained that Brooke noticed that and understood exactly how to use it. She told me I had made myself small, and now they were treating me that way. Her words hurt because they were true. I had stayed useful for so long that I forgot how to be truly seen. Still, something inside me was changing, and I was finally ready to be seen again. That night sleep did not come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Judith's words repeating in my mind about how this had been planned. At 2:17 in the morning, I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The light from my laptop filled the room as I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For years, Brooke had managed most of my online accounts because she always said it was easier. She often told me I should not worry about those things during retirement, and I believed her. I wanted to believe she was helping. I wanted to believe I still mattered. But that night I logged in with new awareness. At first, everything appeared normal. My checking account, savings, and retirement funds were all there. Nothing seemed out of place. But that is how it works. The danger hides inside what looks ordinary. So I searched further and found multiple transfers, small amounts spread over time, labeled as maintenance costs, repairs, and emergency funds, none of which I had approved. I had not authorized any linked payments. When I clicked deeper, I saw that the destination accounts were not in my name. They belonged to Brooke. She had added herself quietly as a secondary user and slowly drained my account in a way designed not to raise suspicion. It was clear then that this was not simple carelessness, but something far more deliberate. This was theft disguised as kindness. And Lucas, was he unaware of it? Or did he simply not care as long as the money continued to come in? I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing not from fear, but from something colder and far more precise. A realization settled inside me, sharp and unmistakable. They were not planning to hurt me someday. They were already doing it, convinced I would never notice. But I had noticed, and I was done staying quiet. By morning my decision was made. There would be no more silence and no more waiting for the next betrayal. It was time to act. I called Mr. Caldwell, my attorney. He had managed my affairs for years, overseeing my will, my retirement planning, and even the paperwork involved when I transferred the house to Lucas and Brooke. He answered immediately and said it was good to hear from me, asking if everything was all right. I told him calmly that it was not, which was why I needed to see him that same day. He cleared his schedule without hesitation. A few hours later, I sat across from him in his office, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I told him I wanted to reverse the house transfer, secure every account, and cancel all existing powers of attorney. Every single one. He paused, not in disagreement but in understanding. He warned that such actions could create tension. I replied that the tension already existed, and that I had simply been too blind to recognize it. He nodded and said we would begin the reversal process, but if I suspected financial abuse, we would need documentation and clear records. I told him I already had some and slid a printed spreadsheet across his desk, adding that I intended to obtain more. He raised an eyebrow and asked whether I would consider hiring a private investigator. I agreed immediately and told him to hire anyone he trusted. He nodded again and said we would move quickly. He would begin the legal filings, and the investigator would start building a full paper trail. As I left his office, something inside me had changed. This was no longer just about stopping them. It was about taking myself back, quietly and deliberately, with a strength they never expected. That afternoon I returned home and sat at my kitchen table, sunlight warming my face. For the first time in weeks my hands were steady. They believed I would remain silent. They thought I was still the woman who signed whatever was placed in front of her with a polite smile. That woman no longer existed, and the one who had replaced her had no intention of disappearing. The next morning I found an envelope tucked beneath my front door. It was white, plain, and instantly familiar. Brooke always used that type when she sent paperwork she claimed to help organize for me. A yellow sticky note sat on top in her looping handwriting, saying I should sign whenever I was ready because it would make everything easier while they were away. I had not heard the door open, which meant someone else had likely delivered it, probably before they left for their cruise. By then they were already gone, sailing across deep blue water, drinking cocktails and smiling for photos. Meanwhile, the envelope waited on my kitchen counter, patient and deceptive. I opened it carefully. The documents inside were neatly typed and professionally arranged. At first glance they appeared harmless, just routine updates, estate adjustments, and standard authorizations. But as I read each line my stomach tightened. Hidden within the legal language was a new power of attorney, permanent and irrevocable. It would give Brooke complete control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions, and even the authority to place me into a care facility without my consent. They were not waiting for me to become frail or incapable. They were preparing to take everything while I was still fully alive. This was not about inheritance. It was about control. I stared at the pages for a long moment, then placed them back into the envelope. I did not cry and I did not raise my voice. I stood still with one hand on the counter and let the truth settle. I spoke softly into the quiet kitchen, as if addressing the woman I once was, saying that I had nearly signed it but would not do so today. Today I saw it clearly. I would not use the document to surrender, but as proof. They believed they were steps ahead, but I had caught up, and I was already changing the direction of things. By midday, I was back in Mr. Caldwell's office. There was no casual conversation this time. He took one look at me and nodded. I explained that they had slipped the envelope under my door while they were away on a cruise and handed it to him. He opened it slowly, his expression tightening as he read. When he reached the section outlining the irrevocable authority, he let out a sharp breath and said it was not just unethical, but predatory. I told him that if I had signed it, they could have sold my home, emptied my accounts, and made decisions about my care, all while pretending to act out of concern. He studied my face expecting panic but found none. I told him we needed to move faster. His concern gave way to respect. He said the house deed reversal had already been filed, the asset freeze was in progress, and the investigator had begun a full financial audit. After reviewing the envelope again, he said we would take stronger measures. Every account would be locked, and no one would access my assets without my direct approval. He added that they were drafting a protective clause so that if any legal pressure followed, there would be a documented timeline of manipulation ready for court. I leaned back in my chair, breathing evenly, my shoulders relaxed. For the first time in years I was not reacting. I was constructing something solid, something they would not notice until it stood firmly between us. When I returned home later that afternoon, the house looked unchanged, but everything was different. I was different. The woman who once paid for love had been replaced by someone else. She was someone who no longer apologized for surviving, someone who understood that peace does not come from acceptance, but from boundaries and self-worth. And now I was guarding both. For days later, their cruise ship returned to port. I was already nearby. I parked a short distance away and stood quietly across the street, watching as Lucas and Brooke arrived, suntanned and relaxed, their luggage stacked in the back of their car, unaware of what was waiting for them. Brooke stepped out of the car first, already issuing sharp instructions about scheduling the mortgage finalization. Lucas followed a few steps behind her, eyes locked on his phone, distant as he always was. Then both of them stopped cold. Two unfamiliar cars sat in the driveway. A moving van stood nearby. A young couple laughed with a realtor near the front door while boxes were being carried inside. It took a moment for the scene to register. Lucas spoke first, his voice unsteady and confused as he called my name. Brooke's expression hardened as she demanded to know what was happening and who the people were. I stepped forward slowly, my voice calm. I told her she would not be managing anything for me anymore. Her tone sharpened immediately as she demanded an explanation. Lucas looked around in rising panic and asked why strangers were inside their house. I answered evenly that it was no longer their house. Brooke moved toward me, her voice climbing as she insisted I could not do this, reminding me of refinancing plans and signed contracts. I reached into my bag and handed Lucas a folder, telling him those were the only agreements that mattered. He opened it with shaking hands, turning pages that detailed the house reversal, sale documents, financial audits, and records of unauthorized transactions. Brooke tore the folder from his hands and scanned the pages desperately, as if searching for a way out. When she looked up, her eyes burned with anger. She insisted none of it would stand, claiming they had only been helping me and warning I would regret this. I met her stare and calmly asked if she meant draining my accounts while smiling at me, taking legal authority without my knowledge, and listing my home as collateral while I trusted her. Lucas tried to speak, saying they never meant for this to happen. I stopped him and told him they never meant to be discovered. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Then I handed Brooke a second folder. Inside were complete legal records documenting every forged signature, every instance of financial abuse, and every act of coercion. I explained that if they chose to take this to court, everything would become public record. They stood motionless, pale and broken. I looked at Lucas, my son, and told him I had been his mother, and that he had turned me into his target. Then I turned away and left without looking back. I drove home slowly as the sun sank behind the rooftops. My new apartment was simple, without luxury or display, but it belonged entirely to me. I set my phone face down on the table, ignoring Lucas's final message, a last attempt at regret. I had nothing more to give. They believed I would collapse without them, but the truth was I had been weighed down by their presence for far too long. Silence is not weakness. It is awareness. And from that moment on, I chose to speak only for myself.